Well, Season 2 of Adventure Time Fionna and Cake has come to an end, meaning that I am once again forced to continue on with my bleak, meaningless life, wondering what I'll do without new Adventure Time content for the next year or two. However, because I want to both start this year on a positive note, and hold on to the serotonin that this season filled me with for a bit longer, I've decided to dedicate a video to discussing the next chapter in Fionna and Cake's story. Now, I talked about the first season of Fionna and Cake a few years ago, back in my Top Cartoons of 2023 video, so if you're for some reason unfamiliar with the series and want to hear my thoughts on Season 1, go check it out. If you want my abridged thoughts on it, it was basically a perfect sequel to my favorite show of all time, and everything I could ask for in an Adventure Time story geared towards young adults. Having that same level of heart, fun, and unhinged creativity that you'd expect from this show, while also tackling more mature, complex subject matter with a level of depth that the original series simply wasn't able to. So obviously, I was excited to see what was next for the series, and unsurprisingly, I absolutely loved it. Now, did I love it as much as Season 1? Well, we'll answer that question in a bit. Also, because I just can't help myself, there will be spoilers all throughout this video, so if you haven't caught up on the show yet, what are you still doing here? Get out there and go watch Peak, you fools! And on that note, let's get into my thoughts on Season 2 of Fionna and Cake. Taking place several weeks after the events of the first season, Fionna, despite having recently saved the world, still finds herself haunted by her past failures and left with a desperate desire to prove that she's grown as a person. An opportunity to do so seems to present itself when her former boss, Queenie, repossesses the sweet spot, Gary and Marshall Lee's bakery / home, prompting Fionna to lead her friends in getting it back. Meanwhile, back in Ooh, Huntress Wizard finds Finn slowly dying from the gash he got, cutting himself on a mysterious bush last season, which Huntress soon learns was the mystical heart of the forest, the source of her magic. When things go haywire when she tries to extract a cure from the heart, Huntress is left with no choice but to join forces with Fionna and Cake to find a new heart of the forest if she wants to save her totally not boyfriend's life. Now, in contrast to the glowing praise that Season 1 of Fionna and Cake received, Season 2 has seen a bit of a divisive reaction from the fanbase, with the main sticking points being the decision to put far greater focus on the mundane Fionna world, and having the narrative be much smaller in terms of its scope. To put things into perspective, the first season's main villain is a god auditor who imprisons cosmic entities and is willing to destroy an entire world out of petty spite. Meanwhile, the antagonists of the second season are landlords, although one could argue that that's just as bad. However, while this tonal shift was initially a bit jarring, I think that this lower stakes story actually worked out really well for this show. Despite the world not being on the line this time around, there's still a strong sense of urgency here. The season does an excellent job at selling the sheer hopelessness of the situation, as we consistently check in on Finn back in Ooh, where his condition only seems to get worse no matter what PB, Marcy, and Simon try. By the season finale, Finn ends up taking on an elderly appearance identical to how he looked when he first enters the afterlife and together again, making it seem like this could be the point where Finn dies. Now, I'm pretty sure most of us seriously doubted that this was the route the narrative would take, but I really do applaud the lengths that the season went to make the idea of Finn dying here actually feel plausible. Even with the smaller scope, the conflict here still feels deeply personal, as we see the sheer lengths Huntress will go to save Finn, as well as how much he means to the rest of Ooh. Granted, the complaints about Season 2's narrative being underwhelming are firmly directed at the Fionna world side of things, with the conflict, again, being Fionna's efforts to save the sweet spot from demolition, while also grappling with her love life. Now, while I can't say that this is the most original plot in the world, I feel like the writing of the story as boring or cliche is a bit reductive. While saving the sweet spot is the end goal, the sweet spot itself isn't the point at all of Fionna's story. Ultimately, the goal of saving the sweet spot simply exists to kick off the actual Fionna world conflict. Fionna's self-loathing and her need to be seen as a hero, leading her down a dark, self-destructive path that drives a wedge between her and her friends. Yeah, saving a building from being destroyed by a greedy land developer isn't an original or exciting plot by any means, but I'll gladly take it if it leads to some genuinely interesting character work. And even with the focus on the much more grounded Fionna world, despite the season's slow start and it downplaying the whole multiverse angle, it still has a good deal of fun, creative plots that lead to some memorable, visually stunning set pieces. These plots include Fionna and Fennel getting high off of Huntress's magic leaves and ending up on Venus, the characters ending up in the undergrowth, an absolutely trippy plane of existence where emotional trauma gets processed by by the karmic worm, and Fionna and Huntress entering a dreamscape that leads them inside Finn's mind, where his dream self is constantly dying violently in these gruesomely creative ways that's presented as a play, with the two of them, alongside Farm World Finn, who did not die, having to find a way to stop this before the Cosmic Owl shows up and causes his croak dream to become a reality. That episode in particular is easily the high point of this season, either despite or because of how genuinely upsetting it is to see the main character of my favorite show getting violently killed again and again. What can I say? It's just part of being an Adventure Time fan. Come for the outlandish adventures, stay for the crippling trauma. Going back to the subject of this season's character work, this is the main reason why I think that its greater emphasis on Fionna World ultimately works. It gives the show a lot more time to flesh out the Fionna and Kate cast, and provide greater insight into their lives and histories that further differentiates them from their Ulan fanfic counterparts, making Fionna World feel more like a fully realized, lived-in setting. While Season 1 got me to care about Fionna and Kate, I feel like the main draw there was Simon's story, as well as the series tying up the loose ends from OG Adventure Time. After Season 2 though, I can safely say that I'm every bit as invested in Fionna World as I am in Ooh. I just feel like I have a better understanding as to how these characters tick now. Even though Season 1 felt like it ended on a pretty conclusive note, I think that Season 2 continues the characters' stories in interesting ways that make sense for them. In stark contrast to the vast majority of isekai stories, Fionna, even after going through this big life-changing adventure that led her to mature and grow as a person, still doesn't have her shit together at all. She doesn't have a job, her love life's a mess, and even after saving the world, all of the people around her only seem to remember her mistakes. This, combined with her trauma from Season 1, has led Fionna to desperately seek out validation and try to be a hero by fixing everything herself in hopes that'll make up for her screw-ups and lead her to stop feeling like a failure. If Season 1 was about the feelings of aimlessness and dissatisfaction that come with being an adult, then Season 2 is about the sense of self-loathing and lack of accomplishment that comes with being in your late 20s. And they absolutely nail that feeling. That sense that you're not good enough, that you haven't grown, that you're still that same dumbass you were when you were younger, that there has to be something you need to achieve to finally feel like an adult, that's all present here. And dear lord, you just feel for Fionna. Her struggles this season are just way too real, man. Fionna's desire to prove herself and fix everything unfortunately leads to her alienating herself from the people she loves by prioritizing saving the sweet spot over listening to what they actually want and need from her as a friend, such as when she makes a deal with Hannah Abadir, who is somehow an even worse parent than Adventure Time's equivalent of the devil from the Bible, much to Marshall's discomfort. That's not even getting into how she fumbles in her love life. All throughout the season, Fionna tries to get back with her ex, Felix, aka DJ Flame, who's seeing someone else, while also giving her all sorts of mixed signals, and it's frustrating in the best possible way. She knows that boy isn't good for her, but she just can't let go of the idea of getting this perfect happy ending with him. Like, come on girl, there's a non-binary hunk right there who isn't a complete tool. All of this culminates in episode 8, where Fiona's friends not only raise the money they need to save the sweet spot without her, but she also ends up pulling a Mordecai and kisses Felix right in front of his girlfriend, Fennel. All of this just emphasizes how much of a walking disaster area Fionna is, and it's so engaging to watch her struggle to come to terms with her screw-ups and accept that her pursuit of being seen as a hero and earning that happy ending is only hurting her and the people she loves. At the end of the day, Fiona's not a hero like Finn, and she doesn't have to be. When she isn't trying so hard, Fiona's more than capable of helping others and making a difference in people's lives just by being empathetic and supportive, which ends up being key to Huntress Wizard's development and the final piece of the puzzle to save Finn. Speaking of Huntress, it's so wild to see how far this character has come, going from a recurring background character to Finn's main love interest and an absolute fan favorite. Despite only having 3 major appearances in the original series, audiences really latched on to Huntress Wizard, to the point where one of the biggest criticisms of Distant Lands was that it only gave her a minor cameo. And now here she is as a deuteragonist of Fionna and Cake Season 2, where we finally get some much needed insight into Huntress's background that greatly expands upon her character. We already know from Flute Spell that Huntress is a loner who fears being vulnerable, which causes her to be reluctant to enter a relationship with Finn, despite clearly having feelings for him. Fionna and Cake not only reveals that this fear of vulnerability and relying on others stems from the trauma of losing her adoptive family, and how that sadness led to her embracing wizard life, but we see firsthand the negative consequences of Huntress constantly shutting people out and stubbornly insisting on doing everything herself. Huntress ends up basically killing the heart of the forest. PB, Marcy, and Simon are left in the dark as to what the Heart's deal is, with their attempts at saving Finn only making things worse, and Finn is left unaware of the true extent of Huntress's love for him, contributing to his feelings that he can never truly be happy, under the belief that no one could care about him like Jake did, which nicely parallels how Fiona's attempts at fixing everything has been pushing people away. It's only through Fiona's own kindness that she's able to move past her pain, let people in, and gain the power to become the new Heart of the Forest, saving Finn and providing him with the support he needs to grapple with his grief over Jake's death, once they finally, after nearly a decade of uncertainty surrounding this ship, unambiguously cement their status as a couple. Big damn kiss and everything, which is just beyond cathartic. Again, it's so wild how far Huntress has come as a character. Fionna and Cake really made her every bit as flawed and compelling as she is completely badass. After this season, I think I'm comfortable calling Huntress Wizard one of my favorite characters in Adventure Time. Meanwhile, Cake's storyline is a lot more interesting than it was in Season 1. While we've seen that Cake is beyond happy now being a stretchy talking cat, she's also forced to grapple with being one of the few magical creatures in an otherwise mundane world. Relatively speaking, of course.
Did you know the cast of Cheers is tiny?
Yeah, of course. Everyone on TV is like 3 inches tall.
As a result, most of the world treats her less like a person and more like a circus attraction to gawk at, leading Cake to feel pressured into conforming to human standards and taking a more humanoid form that she's much less comfortable in. Cake also has to grapple with the fact that, despite no longer being a non-sapient house cat, she still has the instincts of, well, a cat, which only adds to her insecurities. This all leads to her eventually accepting that she's not like the humans of the old world, and rather than pretend to be something she's not, Cake chooses to stay in the undergrowth and figure herself out in a place where she can truly be herself. It also leads her to abandon pursuing a relationship with Emkron due to the inherent awkwardness that comes with a human and anthropomorphic cat, whose natural form isn't particularly humanoid, dating, which just further emphasizes that these characters are much different from the ones that we saw in the Fionna and Cake episodes of Adventure Time. Marshall was definitely another highlight of this season, with Season 2 further delving into his upbringing under his mother, and how that trauma still affects him as an adult. Meanwhile, we get glimpses of the amount of strain that Gary puts on himself through his constant insistence of putting the needs of others above his own. These peeks into their lives just adds to the persistent theme of Fionna World, and by extension adulthood in its entirety, being absolutely exhausting. It was also nice to see more of characters like Hunter, Emkron, and Fennel, all of whom are pretty chill and likable, though I think Fennel probably could have used a bit more screen time. There's also plenty more fun cameos from all sorts of gulp shittos throughout Adventure Time's history. Shout out to my man Bellamy Bug, who was brought back after his single appearance in Adventure Time Season 1's Rainy Day Daydream, where he had 15 seconds of screen time max. And it was about damn time too. As for the villains, this is unfortunately an area where this season's a bit lacking. I gave a bit of flack to Scarab for not being all that interesting when I talked about Season 1, but in hindsight, I might have been a bit too harsh on him, especially with how entertainingly petty he is this season. While he wasn't an amazing villain, Scarab at least succeeded at being this threatening figure who had a persistent, intimidating presence in the narrative. Meanwhile, the closest things we have to big bads this season are Queenie, who, while working fine enough as an obstacle that causes Fionna to go down a self-destructive path, is ultimately a pretty bland hate sink, especially when compared to her entertainingly douchey counterpart, King Boo, and Witch Wizard, a character set up in episode 2 as Huntress's rival who wants to keep the Heart of the Forest for herself, but she completely disappears from the narrative until episode 9, and ultimately doesn't do all that much, which is weird since her fight with Finn back in Season 1 is the reason why he's dying in the first place. It's a shame because Witch Wizard really could have worked as this cool evil counterpart to Huntress, but she just isn't given the screen time to leave that much of an impression. Her having this persistent presence really would have added tension to the narrative, as well as remedy people's issues with this season's pacing and abundance of focus on the mundane. However, there is one villain who I think really worked here, Hannah Abadir, who's honestly kind of a top-tier Adventure Time villain. Even though she's not an eldritch horror or mystical being, Hannah is genuinely among the franchise's most unnerving antagonists. She just has this perpetually cheerful demeanor that fails to give off even the tiniest bit of warmth, or a sense that she's remotely interested in anyone other than herself. Beneath her affable appearances, Hannah Abadir is someone who who only sees people as stepping stones to push her own agendas, including her own son. The show manages to perfectly capture just how cold and dismissive a person Hannah is, while almost always having her maintain this uncanny, perky attitude. She generally gives off the same unsettling, laughably evil energy as White Diamond. What makes Hannah even more terrifying is that due to the amount of power she has in the city, there's this sense that despite Marshall's best efforts, he'll never truly be able to escape her. I also love the touch of having her share the same voice actress as Marceline's mom in Obsidian. Unsurprisingly, like in Season 1, there's plenty of cool lore reveals for Adventure Time veterans, as well as some noteworthy developments for classic characters. Highlights include the Vampire King still residing in Marceline's mind, tempting her to try and save Finn by turning him to a vampire, but will come breaking down after realizing that her efforts to save Finn nearly got him killed, with the immense pressure she put on herself throughout this whole ordeal, leading her to walk away as ruler of the Candy Kingdom, and the surprise return of Fern, who got the happy ending they deserved and is out living their best life in the undergrowth. However, I think it's the scenes with Finn that'll stick with viewers the most, and understandably so. While you got a sense that Finn wasn't taking the implied to be recent death of Jake well in Season 1, the bits we see of him this season paint a very clear picture of how not okay he is. Finn has reached a point where he just doesn't feel like he has much to live for without Jake. Yeah, he's still willing to go through the motions of life, but he makes it explicitly clear that he's perfectly content with dying if it means that he gets to see his brother again. It's to the point where the season finale reveals that Finn, using his mental connection with Fionna, pushed her to blame him for Huntress seemingly killing the Cosmic Owl, a crime punishable by a millennium of pain and torment. Like, holy crap, man. Honestly, the entire scene with Finn and Fionna in the finale is easily the high point of the entire season, and among my favorite moments in Adventure Time period. It's such a quiet, tender moment between these two, and everything from the dialogue to the vocal performances is just perfect. I especially love the decision to have Finn presented here as his teenage self hiding away. It just perfectly illustrates his current state of arrested development, and Fionna ultimately convincing Finn that he's loved and to give life another shot was just an absolutely beautiful way to resolve this storyline. Also, in case you're wondering, no, I don't think that this is at odds with Together Again. I honestly never got the sense that they were implying that Finn died alone and sad like some people claim, just that he never fully got over Jake's death, but was still able to live a happy life. Now, with all of my gushing of this season, you'd think that I loved it just as much as Season 1, and honestly, I did for a bit, but once the high I got from Season 2 wore off, I began to notice some of the problems people took with it. First off, as much as I enjoyed the Fionna World cast as a whole, Felix was the one major character that I didn't particularly like. Felix is really underdeveloped and feels way more shallow than I think was intended. The show seems to want to portray him as a deeply flawed but relatively decent guy who simply isn't good for Fionna, but he's such a poorly realized character that he just comes across as this unreliable, womanizing douchebag. It's to the point where Fionna and Felix leaving on amicable terms doesn't really feel earned, especially with how he tries to get back with her after breaking Fennel's heart. Like, Fionna, this is the same guy who dumped you via text message. You should be giving him the Ash treatment right now.
Oh my, oh!
It also takes a bit for the show's plot to really get going, with it taking until episode 4 for the Fionna World and News storylines to really start intersecting with each other. Lastly, while the season finale was great, I thought that the conflict with the Sweet Spot was resolved pretty abruptly. Like, I know that I said that the Sweet Spot itself wasn't the point of Fionna's arc here, but just having it cut to months later, where they apparently turned the ruined Sweet Spot into a thriving community center with little explanation as to how they got the funds to do so after buying the area from Queenie, just feels a bit off. I'm really hoping that the theory that this was the result of Marshall making a deal with Hudson ends up being right, because otherwise, this feels like a pretty anticlimactic way to end this plotline. With all that in mind, despite Fionna and Cake themselves having more interesting character arcs this season, I can't say that Fionna and Cake Season 2 is on the same level as its absolutely phenomenal first season. That said, while I can understand why some people didn't vibe with the more mundane tone of this season, despite the pacing issues and some elements of the story not quite clicking with me, I still enjoyed Season 2 quite a bit. It might not be the 10 out of 10 masterpiece the first season was, but Season 2 still has the fun concepts, strong characterization, and excellent handling of mature subject matter that made Fionna and Cake Season 1 work so well, while greatly expanding on the cast and setting up Adventure Time to go in a really interesting, exciting direction. And I absolutely cannot wait to see what this series has in store for us in the future. So what did you think of this season of Fionna and Cake? How do you think it compares to the first? Let What measures are you taking to cope with the wait for more Adventure Time? Feel free to discuss in the comments below if you like. Maybe even consider subscribing if you want to hear more of me rambling about one of the few reasons I have left for living. And with that, we'll be returning to this channel's usual offerings of cynicism and sadness. Here's hoping that this is a year I actually upload more, and not get sidetracked making a 3-hour video. No promises though. Insert mildly humorous closing line here.